Right after getting my driver's license, I applied for a job at a local Pizza Hut restaurant. I was really excited that I could now drive, and getting a job which required me to drive was the perfect situation for me at the time. I usually covered the day shift since I was still new, but a couple of times a month I would get some night shifts as well. During one of my night shifts, I remember it was a very cold and rainy night at the end of October. I was the only driver delivering at the time. The other person on the shift with me was taking orders and making the pizzas. It was a particularly quiet night, and I was just sitting in the restaurant talking with him. It was just after midnight when the phone rang. My colleague picked up and asked the customer what he'd like to order. I couldn't hear what the customer was saying on the phone, but my colleague raised his eyebrows and looked at me. When he hung up, he said that the customer sounded a bit weird, like he had been drinking and slurring his words. He said that he made an order for 4 large pizzas and some sodas. My colleague made the pizzas, boxed them up and sent me on the delivery. I typed in the address on my phone, and it showed me that it was quite far away from the restaurant, and in an unfamiliar area to me. Since I was the only one delivering at the time, I had no choice but to deliver the pizzas. I started driving across town while following the GPS on my phone. The more I got near to the address shown on my GPS, the further away from town I got. There were no other cars on the road, and it was raining heavily by this point. As I was driving down this long, empty road, I noticed a car's headlights ahead, but it didn't seem like the car was moving. As I got closer, I noticed a large truck stopped in the middle of the road. I saw that there was no way to pass him, so I stopped on the side of the road. I got a bad feeling, since there was nobody else around for miles. I stood there for a few minutes, then the truck started moving and went past me. I looked at my phone and saw that the address was only about a mile ahead. As I approached, I turned down a small dirt road and got to what seemed like an abandoned old farmhouse. The front door seemed to be missing, and most of the windows were broken. I thought I had written down the address wrong on my phone, so I called my colleague at the restaurant to confirm it. He gave me the same address I had put into my phone. I tried calling the customer, but nobody picked up. As I turned around to go back to the main road and return to the restaurant, I saw headlights coming towards me. It was the same truck I had seen earlier blocking the main road. My heart sinked, and I got an eerie feeling. The truck stopped just ahead of me, and a man got out and started walking towards my car. He was holding a bottle in his hand, and by the way he was walking, it seemed like he was drunk. He knocked on my window and mimicked for me to roll it down. I said that I don't feel comfortable doing that. Then he started banging hard on my window with his bottle while pulling the door handle. The bottle broke and cut his hand, but that didn't seem to bother him, as he started hitting my window with his bloodied fist. I was panicking, but I put the car in drive and swerved onto the field past his truck to get out of there as quickly as possible. As I got back on the main road, I was shaking and kept checking my rearview mirror, thinking he would follow me. I called the police and told them about the situation, then went back to the restaurant. 2 officers came and took a statement from me. I received a call from the police station the next day saying that they were unable to locate the man. I could only imagine what he would have done if he had managed to break my car window. I used to work night shifts as a pizza delivery driver for a local pizza restaurant in my town. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills. Most nights were pretty routine, delivering pizzas to hungry customers, driving around town, and listening to music. But one night things took a weird turn. It was a chilly autumn evening, and I was making a late-night delivery to a remote part of town. The address was in a wooded area, and I had never been there before. The address that was showing on the app seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. It happened sometimes with older houses, especially ones that were secluded from the rest of the urban area. As I drove deeper into the woods, I started to feel a sense of unease. The trees seemed to close in on the road, and the darkness was thick. The road leading up to the house was pretty old and filled with potholes, so I drove very slowly as to not damage my car. When I finally arrived at the address, I couldn't help but notice how isolated it was. There were no other houses nearby, just a small, rundown house. The driveway was closed off by an old gate. As I approached, I stopped outside of the gate, which had been locked with a chain and padlock. I tried getting a hold of the customer so they can unlock the chain, but nobody picked up. I parked my car outside the gate and grabbed the pizza. I figured I'd walk over to the house since it wasn't too far from where I had parked. I went around the gate and made my way to the front door. I walked up to the house and knocked on the door. A few seconds went by, but there was no response. I knocked again, a bit louder this time. Just as I was about to give up and head back to my car, I heard shuffling from inside the house. The door creaked open slowly, and an older man stood in the doorway. I couldn't see his face because of how dark it was. There were no lights on anywhere around the house that I could see, except for a dim lamp in the walkway. The man looked at me and said,
"What took you so long?"
I apologized and told him that the address is quite far from the pizza restaurant. He looked at me menacingly and said,
"Wait here. I need to go get my wallet."
He went inside the house. A couple of minutes went by and I started getting an odd feeling. A few moments later, he came back and said,
"I can't seem to find my wallet. You can come in while I search for it."
I didn't want to be rude, but that whole situation started getting more and more uncomfortable for me. I told him that I'd rather wait outside. His face changed and gave me a terrifying look before pulling a gun out from behind his trousers. He pointed it at me and yelled for me to give him my money and my phone. I complied. Then he shoved me away and slammed the door. I quickly ran back to my car and started driving back to the restaurant. I was shaking the whole time and nearly went off the road a few times while driving back, due to how distressed I was. When I arrived back at the restaurant, I told my coworkers about what had happened. One of them called the police and they sent some officers to the house. They couldn't find anyone there, and later said that the house has been vacant for some time. They said that there have been a few instances of this happening lately, with other delivery workers. It took me a while to get over the whole situation. I'm just glad things didn't turn out worse for me that night and I got away safely. Back in my food delivery days, I had my fair share of strange encounters, but one night stands out as the weirdest of them all. I was working for DoorDash just after high school in order to make some extra cash. I enjoyed the job because it let me drive around and relax. I also liked the idea to be by myself for a while, as I lived with my parents and two brothers at the time. Most shifts went by pretty quick, and on some days I made good money from all the tips. One snowy winter night I was working late, and it was just after midnight when I decided to take one last order and call it a day. It was quite a big order, so I thought I might receive a good tip. I picked up the food from the restaurant and started driving. The roads were mostly empty and snowy. I jumped onto the highway and followed the app to where it said the place was. The address led me to an old rundown apartment building on the outskirts of town. I had never been in that part of town before, but it was one of those places that had seen better days. The apartment building looked old and withered. I parked on the street near the entrance, grabbed the food from my car, and entered the building. Immediately, I was hit by a lingering musty smell and the lights were flickering. I went up the stairs and headed to the third floor of the building, where the customer's apartment was located. I walked down a long, dark corridor where only one light bulb seemed to be working, but it was dim. When I reached the door, I could hear faint murmurs from inside the apartment. It sounded like multiple people were talking in hushed tones. I knocked, and everything immediately went silent. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but no one came to the door. I took my phone out to call the customer, but just as I was about to dial, the door creaked open slowly, revealing a dimly lit apartment. A middle-aged man with messy hair and a worn-out bathrobe stood in the doorway. His eyes were red, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't say a word, just extended a shaky hand to take the order. I told him the total, and he handed me a crumpled wad of cash. As I counted the money, I couldn't help but ask, "Is everything all right in there?" He hesitated for a moment, then mumbled something about having a family gathering, and abruptly closed the door. I turned to leave, but as I walked down the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I reached the stairwell, I heard the door of the apartment burst open, followed by a chorus of voices raised in conversation. I froze in my tracks, debating whether to go back and check on the man. Before I could decide, the man reappeared at the door. He looked even more disheveled than before, and had a weird, terrified look in his eyes. This time he spoke more clearly.
You need to get out of here, now.
I didn't need any further convincing. I bolted down the stairs in a hurry. As I reached the ground floor, I heard the man's frantic voice shouting at me from above.
They're coming for you too!
I left the building and ran through the snow back to where I had parked. I jumped into my car and sped away from that apartment building as quickly as I could. On the drive back, I felt unnerved and anxious. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I told my friends about the encounter the next day, and they said that it was probably just some crazy guy off his meds. While that may have been the case, I still can't figure out who all those people were in there with him, and why he seemed so distressed. I never found out who they were or what was going on in that apartment, and I never delivered to that address again. To this day, I can't help but wonder what I narrowly avoided that night. The encounter left me with more questions than answers, and a lingering sense of unease.